Welcome to The Derivative by RCM Alternatives. Send it. All right, welcome back, everybody. I am finally back in Chicago. Had a travel nightmare yesterday, left Miami. Was down at the Future Proof Miami event, looking at ETFs and all the Josh Brown stuff, and left there at 6 p.m., got diverted to Cleveland because of some thunderstorms, tornadoes, hail, and ended up basically sleeping in the terminal there in Cleveland. Got 20 minutes sleep on the floor and landed this morning like 8 a.m. So woe is me, but that's not why you're here. A lot of AI talk down in Miami, how advisors and ETFs can leverage AI. And we put up a nice blog post this week about the Citrini research piece, which is kind of a preview of what could go wrong with AI in the economy. So go check that out, rcmalts.com. On to this episode, got a great one for you today. Ian Weiner of Center15 came on to talk what's happening in Iran, drones, defense tech, critical tech, a bunch of tech things I didn't know anything about. So how do these drones work? Why are there swarms? How do we defend against them? Really interesting conversation, and really interesting that there's venture capital and private equity groups out there looking at this kind of stuff and pushing the tech forward in ways just the government alone can't do. So here we go. Send it. All right, everyone. We're here with Ian Weiner. How are you, Ian?
Good, thank you.
Good. And where are you located? You just were telling me offline. LA?
Los Angeles, yep.
All right. What part?
Live in an area called West Adams, which is closer to downtown.
All right. Any fires, mudslides? Are you pretty protected against natural disasters there?
We're in a pretty good spot as it relates to natural disasters, I think. Earthquakes are still a concern, but the other stuff we're okay for now.
I feel like everyone at least I do, forgets about that the big one still could come to LA. Gets mentioned more with San Fran than LA.
Right.
You excited for the Olympics to come out there? I was just into these previous Olympics, or is it going to be a hassle with traffic and everything?
Well, we got the World Cup first.
Oh.
But yes, the Olympics should be a lot of fun, I hope.
Awesome. So let's get right into it. Wanted you to come on, graduate of West Point in the defense tech industry. So obviously we've been in a bit of we can talk about that, whether it's a war or not, but I'm going to call it a war. In a war with Iran here, but what are your quick thoughts? What surprised you? What's kind of gone as expected on what's happening over there in the Middle East?
Yeah, so, as related to what it's called, if it's not a real war, it'll do until the real war gets here. But, I think that the things that happen that are not surprising, is our ability to quickly establish, air dominance. We degraded, we and the Israelis, degraded the Iranian air defenses pretty drastically last summer. So no surprise that we were able to sort of quickly establish our ability over the skies to kind of do as we please. Not a surprise that we were able to take out the regime, at least this iteration of it, as quickly as we did. Our intelligence capabilities, again, us and the Israelis have always been sort of significantly better than others. And so it's not a surprise that we have been able to decapitate the regime in that respect. I think the reaction from Iran has been a bit surprising, just from sort of scattershot missile launches at different countries around the region. I think surprised people a bit.
Yeah, like hotels and whatnot. Are those misses, or is that on purpose?
Well, these things are hard to tell. I think just more the fact that missiles came in the direction of those countries at all was a little surprising, but these things continue. And so, I think when you step aside from all that and just sort of look at, what are the lessons learned in week one of this, I think that it's clear that there is a lot of discussion that is going to happen and needs to happen around the available supply of interceptors that we have from a missile stock basis and what appears to be clearly an asymmetry in the costs of those interceptors relative to the drones that they're taking out. And so I think that's a major discussion item, which is already picking up as far as noise around having that discussion. I think that it's clear from the damage that's been done to whether it's oil installations or airports or wherever it is, that there needs to be clear counter drone priorities made. And those tie into that interceptor discussion because I think we need to really continue to improve our layered defense around not just military bases, but really any critical installation that is out there. And so when you see these things getting attacked, as they have been, I think it's a good reminder of what could happen here on the homeland quite easily. And those threats will likely only increase. And then I think that the third thing that's pretty interesting is the use of the space domain. I think that this is the first, conflict where we're really seeing the use of assets in space as sort of a tip of the spear in terms of identifying targets, tracking targets, intelligence gathering. We've had these assets up there for a while and we continue to grow them. But I think in this case, we're seeing them used in a much greater fashion than they had kind of previously in a lot of the other stuff that we've done. So those are kind of my key takeaways, sort of first week since this, began kind of at least this year
Yeah.
it began.
And so talk a little bit more about the space piece. I hadn't seen or heard that, right? Everyone knows satellites, and I can only imagine they're improving exponentially with everything, and there's real time ish views from the satellites. Or what are you saying, that it was initiated in space?
Well, more just that the number of satellites that we have on orbit,
Hmm.
the sophistication of the sensors that we have on orbit has led them to bring down latency timeline to a point where they've become a lot more relevant on the battlefield. And so I think that when I look at sort of where our intelligence gathering is taking place, there's more and more of it happening from the space domain, from low Earth orbit, and giving us the ability to read and react in ways and gather intelligence, whether it's from just overall sensing of different, signals that are coming off the Earth, or in a combination with imagery and a combination of ground-based radar systems that I think we've been able to use assets in space for the first time in ways that we haven't been able to in past conflicts.
And is that, I'm imagining like my old Jack Ryan books of, right, an analyst poring over some satellite image. I'm sure that's at least 80% AI now, of like,
Yeah.
what am I actually looking at? And the AI can quickly get through all that. So
Yes.
that's part of what you're saying. Like, okay, we can more quickly turn this stuff over of what's happening down there.
Yes. And as a result, it becomes much more relevant to the warfighter who's actually on the battlefield.
Mm. And then where does that tie in with communications? Like, I didn't see anything. Was that land based that we jammed all their communications into all that? Or does that also start to go up into space?
It
Right.
depends.
Like, I'm thinking of Starlink and Elon Musk able to turn off the Russians' internet and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think, each system has different sort of capabilities and different weaknesses. I think it depends on the signal that you're trying to jam, but I think that a lot of the jamming that takes place is done terrestrial.
And so the second piece you mentioned of the surprising them sending were those missiles or drones that they were sending to these other countries? Seemed like
I
mostly
think they
missiles.
sent a combination of both, but there's been a lot of the drone attacks, the one-way attack drones that they have.
Yeah. So let's dive into that, of kind of give us the zoom out on what drone warfare really looks like. Um, right. Because this isn't an Iran thing. This is every country in the world now has this drone capability. Or is Iran unique and they building these cheap one-way ones?
No, I think, most militaries at this point have different levels and have for years have had certain unmanned vehicles, whether they're aerial or what we're seeing more of, at least we're trying to do more unmanned surface vehicles on the water and unmanned ground vehicles. But from a drone, most people think of, kind of those quadcopters that fly around. You know, historically, the U.S. military and drones are grouped by size. So Group 1 drones are the smallest. Those are the little quadcopters. Group 3 drones are the mid-sized drones that do more intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. But there are one-way attack drones that are of that size. And then the Group 5 drones, those have historically been Predators, and now the Reaper. They're very expensive, fly very high, but have capabilities where they can target, specific areas with large munitions. And so that's always historically been the case. I think what's changed and what we saw in Ukraine and we've seen in other pockets of the world is, the ability to use a very small, cheap drone to cause significant damage to very large platforms.
Mhm.
And so that is, the biggest change that we witnessed in Ukraine and other areas, is just how those one-way attack drones are able to extract a lot of damage at very little cost. And so that is essentially changed the entire way that we need to think about both the use cases of these large platforms and how effective they can be on a modern battlefield, and whether we want to invest the kind of dollars that are required to build them. And then also, how do you defend against these drones that are coming in at targets, whether they are military targets or commercial targets?
And so talk the group. Well, first of all, why is there no group 2 or 4? They didn't want even numbers?
No,
Are those
there actually are Group 2 and 4. There's just not that many of them, and they kind of
got it.
blend a little bit. So we tend to look kind of 1, 3, 5. But no, Group 4, Group 5 are there certainly are drones that occupy those
And
numbers.
those Predator and Reaper, are those the ones that used to be piloted but remotely, or are they still piloted remotely?
They're still piloted remotely.
Okay, so the Group 5s are still remote, so they're not truly unmanned. And then the Group 1, those little, right? I think most people, when they hear drones, are thinking those little quadcopters. So what can those do? What do they put on those? Like some small munitions, or it's just to
Yeah,
crash into things?
yeah. Put on a small munition and crash it into something. It's typically the use case that we've seen.
And then what's the range on the 3 of those? So we're talking
Range as far as how,
like
how
a Group 1, Iran can't attack the US obviously with one of those, much
no,
less like can it
Group
go
1
100
drones are.
miles or
Yeah, Group 1 drones, are, I would think about those as primarily very near tactical kind of, you know, on the battlefield, very close to the target. They can fly a distance, but the longer they fly, the more likely that they're not going to survive up in the sky because of, you know, jamming signals and things like that. So,
yeah.
so, you know, are you going to use a quadcopter in the Indo-Pacific? No, it's not going to
Mm,
do anything. Group 3 drones, mid-size sort of, ISR type mission sets, those drones can fly, you know, 10, 12 hours. They fly, pretty high up in the air, 8 to 10,000 feet, and they're conducting surveillance missions and intelligence gathering missions. And so that's a different mission set. That's more appropriate for the Indo-Pacific, where you're going to have to travel large distances. And then the Group 5 drones, which, have historically been what we've used for a lot of those missions, they are becoming an interesting discussion point. A Reaper costs, $25 million. And for a long time, many years, they were largely untouchable. But now we've seen the Houthis be able to take them down with shoulder fired rockets. And
mhm,
so, the calculation that the Pentagon and the military need to make are, you know, what's our kind of cost benefit analysis of this? Are we going to spend another $25 million on one of these, or are we going to just buy a lot more of these kind of Group 3 drones that may cost $500,000 or $750,000, and we can afford to lose a lot more of them, and they can perform a very similar mission than some of the Predators do, and so that that's the discussion that is happening. It's one of many that's happening where the administration and just the militaries around the world overall are rethinking tactics and strategy based on everything we've seen over the last few years.
And that is why the drone exists in the first place, though, right? Like you had a $300 million F-16 and said, hey, we can do 80% of the mission profile with a $25 million Predator. Let's build more of those. But you're saying now we could even go a step lower. Like, hey, maybe we need
Yeah.
100x of a $2 million platform.
Yeah, I mean, it's a constrained environment. There's only so much money and there's only so much ability to build these things.
Right.
And that's not dissimilar from the conversation that's taking place right now about munitions and interceptors and how are we going to restock everything that we're using or that our allies are using, and how do we do it quickly. And so they're similar discussions. It's like you can spend a certain amount of money on things, but at some point you can't keep spending money on it. And then you got to ask, well, what am I getting for the extra, 10x what I'm going to pay relative to, well, now I've got some stuff that I can actually afford to lose and I've got more of them. And so is that a better strategy than what we're doing or what we have done in the past?
And so flipping the card, what are the Iranians using? I've seen some of the videos of they look like a quarter size jets, right? They look like small
Yeah,
jets.
they have various different vehicles. The Shahed is sort of their kind of feature. That's the one that's been used in Ukraine by the Russians. And that's the one that you'll see mostly used. It's a
Is
one
that
that
Russian made?
no, well, the Russians are making their own version of it, but the
Got it.
Iranians have been making them for a while, for years, and have been shipping them to Russia. But the Shahed, it's a one-way attack drone. And they have a lot of them. They've made a lot of them. They're losing a lot of them. But that's sort of a great way to inflict damage very cheaply. And so that's a drone that I don't know, $15,000, maybe somewhere in that range, depending on how many they're making. So that
And
you can put a lot of those at targets.
and so I've read they've launched like more than 2,000. Like how many do they have, do we think? 20,000, 200,000? Like,
Hard to say. It's whatever they don't have a lot of it's not like they have endless inventory of these things.
yeah.
And whatever inventory they do have is being targeted. And so, they're certainly on a short fuse as far as what their time horizon is. But, the reality is they still have them, they're still firing them, and it's still an effective way of causing damage very cheaply.
Yeah. And then leading into the interceptor conversation. So what's the base platform there, Israel, US, to defend against these things?
I
And
mean,
like you were touching on, we're spending a whole lot of money to shoot down a $15,000 drone.
yeah, I mean, there's different levels of interceptors. There's different systems. The Patriot system has historically been, one of the ones that's been used over the years. There's a THAAD system. They're all a lot of these are woven into Israel's Iron Dome. But, on average, imagine that if you've got a battery or something that's protecting an asset and you're firing, an interceptor, so to speak, you could be firing something that's a few $1,000,000. And per interceptor. And so the question becomes, if the Iranians are firing, sending $20,000 drones at, our targets, is, in a world of limited, sort of resources, can we continue to use $3 million missiles to take out those $20,000 drones? And, it would seem to me that the answer is no.
I would argue we could just print more money, but that's a discussion for another podcast. But then you're saying, hey, if this is one time, like this war is happening, and yeah, it's worth as much money in the world to protect the assets, protect the people. But if it's constant over who knows how long. So what's the analysis? What are you hearing of, like, there's only a limited amount of that defense, so to speak?
Well, I mean, it's unclear. I mean, my sense is that we still have significant stockpile, but I think we're certainly expending a bunch, right now. So are our allies. And so, when you think about kind of where we are, we're certainly depleting inventory. And now the question is, how quickly can you replenish that inventory? And I think that that's a challenge. It's been a challenge for us, for many years to manufacture things quickly at scale when it comes to defense. And there's historically a variety of reasons for that. And the administration is quickly trying to remedy that. It's not that easy to remedy. It takes time and culture shift and money. And so, I think that that's going to be one of the big challenges in front of us is how do we actually replenish this inventory and do it in a timely enough fashion that it can act as a deterrent in other areas of the world that probably pose much bigger threats.
Right? And we're not talking World War II, turn over all the factories to make bombers and
Well,
right, and all that get
yeah, I don't think so. I think it's more just how do we put the proper incentive structure in place, which we're doing to ensure that the companies are incentivized to move quickly.
and where are these things which companies we talking about? The big, huge
Yeah, I mean, historically, whether it's Lockheed or RTX or
yeah.
General Dynamics or others who are involved in these supply chains, I mean, you just have historically had some very large defense primes, and that's what they've done. I mean, they do a lot of different things, to be fair, but you know, building munitions and bombs and everything else is something that has historically been their mission set. And what we've witnessed over the last few decades is that the incentive structure was upside down as far as getting product on time and cheaply was not, the incentive structure. The incentive structure was actually the opposite, which was to say that, everything was done on a cost plus contract. And so as a result, there was no incentive. In fact, you were incentivized to take longer and incentivized to have costs go up because it was the taxpayer that was fitting the extra bill. And so that resulted in not just in munitions, but in kind of everywhere, cost overruns, and more importantly, product just wasn't getting to the warfighter when it was actually applicable on the battlefield. And so what you've seen now with this kind of last few years of defense tech investing is a belief that that is changing and changing quickly. So that is, the rationale, I think, for a lot of venture capitalists who are, now getting into the sector, that they see that, there's been a paradigm shift and therefore the sector is investable, so to speak.
Is the green flag for incentives has gone up, so to speak.
Yeah, and if 5 years ago, if you were a defense tech company and you had an interesting product, you might get a little money to kind of develop that product, but you would have to wait years before a shot at any real revenue, and that valley of death, where you sat was
Yeah.
just a place where, if you're a venture capitalist, you're not looking to say, well, I'm going to float this company for 7 years while we wait for the government, who may, by the way, change administrations multiple times along the way, to actually give these guys a real contract that would show up in the budget as a program of record. So that's changing now. So that changed everything. So now folks like us and folks like others who are coming into the sector now can appreciate that if the government has ways of getting money and revenue into the hands of these companies sooner, then that creates a much better return profile and business model.
So let's get into the portfolio, or give us a little background, right? We got right into the war stuff. So give us a little background on your company, and then we'll talk about some of the portfolio pieces there.
Sure. So, our company is about 18 months old now. We invest in growth stage companies doing critical tech for national security. So, defense technologies are certainly a large part of that. And when we say growth stage, we define that as a company that can be a public company in less than 3 years, do significant amounts of research on the companies that we invest in. We usually have known companies for 6 years or 6 months or more at a minimum. and oftentimes we've known them for years. And, we have investors who invest with us. We do everything on an opportunity by opportunity basis. What we provide the companies is, sort of threefold is that we have 6 years of private market experience investing in the sector. We have significant relationships that can help develop the company's business once we're invested. And then finally, I have, over 2 decades of public market experience. And so that is something that's uncommon in a lot of the private world. And so we're able to work with our founders and CEOs and discuss, sort of our thoughts around how to, maximize exit valuation based on how we think the public investors are going to think about the company. And so we have a very kind of narrow and deep product. And, it's all about, doing significant amounts of research and trying to identify top-down trends for where we think the demand signals are today and where they're going to be in the next 2 to 3 years. And then trying to identify what we think are the best companies that are going to play that theme where the dollars are going.
It's narrow and deep. I like, yeah. And how'd you come up with the name?
So
Tell us the name.
I played Center15 Capital is the name. I played ice hockey at West Point, and that was my position and number.
I love it. So were you all in on the double USA gold medals watching those games?
100%. Yeah.
Double OTs.
Yeah.
That was as good as it gets.
Great stuff.
And so you kind of said critical tech and defense tech. What if I have to put you in a bucket? Is it defense tech, or how do you kind of make that delineation?
So defense tech is part of critical tech for national security. I think that where we sit and where our resources are and where we think we can be most helpful are going to be probably in the harder side of defense technology, as opposed to other areas that would fit the bill of critical tech. Like a quantum computing, for instance, right? Where we're not going to be able to be as helpful. And we likely don't know the sector. Well, I know we don't know the sector as well. And so, we try to focus on where we feel our strengths are. And that tends to come in the more traditional defense technologies.
So tying it back to our earlier conversation, like talk about some of the companies here. So we didn't talk about what a drone swarm is. What's a swarm? Excuse me.
Yeah. So people define it differently. I think at this stage, what most people consider a drone swarm is just, a number of small quadcopters flying at a target. Could be 25, could be 250. I think that a swarm, if you're going to truly define it the way that I think it should be, they should be interconnected somehow and be able to read from each other in order to get to a target. That would be more of a truly defined swarm. I've yet to see the technology or the autonomy stack that can do that with a bunch of drones at this point. So
have you seen one of those drone LED shows? That's basically what we're talking about.
Yeah, except that I view that more as like, yes, that people can call that a swarm. If you want to fly.
But they're coordinated and they're linked, right?
Right, but they're linked by a person. They're not operating
autonomously
on their own as swarm of bees might. Where if you watch, whether it's bird formations or you watch different real swarms of things, if a few of them get killed or impacted or something happens, the swarm reforms and continues on towards its mission. That's a true drone swarm. And that's only done through software.
We're talking Star Trek now, and some
of it's
hive mind stuff. Yeah,
certainly the future, but it's being worked on. But I think in the traditional sort of what does it mean? Like I think most people when they think of a drone swarm, they say, okay, there's some person out there or multiple people controlling 100 quadcopters, and they send them into a football stadium. That's kind of a swarm.
And so one of your portfolio companies does some protection against swarms, right?
Yeah. So
how would I protect, and what's the way now, and what is this company doing different?
Yeah. So when we think about drones, obviously there's the counter drone side of that, and how do you stop these drones? And historically, and still, there's multiple ways to stop a drone. We have everything from the very expensive munitions that I mentioned that we spend. We have pretty sophisticated.
But then you're talking about a $3 million missile to knock down a $100 quadcopter or $500? Yeah.
Correct, or something,
Yeah.
within that realm, and it's a kinetic effect. So if you're firing a missile at something, then your stuff's going to blow up, and where that
Yeah.
shrapnel goes is something else. um, we've got traditional jammers. That's what we see a lot of on the battlefield in Ukraine, and where you see a lot of other battlefields where you can use systems to jam radio frequency signals or GPS signals.
That's one of those Humvees we see with the big kind of array on top of it.
Yeah, they come in that. They come in like they can look like a gun where you're literally firing out, or you're disrupting signals. So there's a variety of delivery methods, but suffice to say, you're basically eliminating the signal that connects the drone to its end user or to know where it is. So, 95% of the drones in Ukraine fall out of the sky without hitting their target because they're operating in an environment that's considered totally denied.
Hmm.
And so an inability to fly and operate in those environments. So that's
Couldn't
another
it
way
couldn't they program it to, like, at loss of signal, continue on to last known target or something?
they
Seems like
can,
yeah.
but again, not easy to do. And
Okay.
especially not on a quadcopter,
Got it.
because you're basically using them because they're very cheap, right? So you're
Yeah.
not looking to put a lot of money into developing something sophisticated for them. So you've got kinetic effects like munitions. You've got jammers. There are companies out there that have nets that try to essentially force and find a net, put a net over the drone coming in. You've got other companies
Like
that,
shooting the nets up in the air?
or from one drone, you're flying a drone and you have a net to capture another drone. So that's one way. They've got, for as many drones as there are counter drone technologies, and then there's directed energy. And that's kind of where we focused on what we believe is the most cutting edge counter drone technology. And directed energy consists mostly of lasers, high powered microwaves, which is where we chose to focus as a firm from an investment perspective. But what makes directed energy interesting is that if you look at the drones that we're defending against and the options that we have right now, if there's a drone that is truly has great autonomy, then that drone doesn't rely on a radio frequency signal or GPS to know where it is, to know what it's doing, to know what its mission is. And so if that's the case, it does not have the same kind of signals that a jammer could actually jam, right?
Hmm.
So if you can't jam it, right, how do you stop it? Same with these fiber optic controlled drones that we're seeing in Ukraine. Those drones that are being used on fiber optic cables, they're not using the traditional signals that a jammer takes out. So how do
So
you
talk
stop?
about that. There's a thin fiber optic cable actually coming off the drone
Yes,
to the controller.
that's how it's being operated. Yep.
How long is that cable?
I mean, some of them are quite
Miles? Yeah.
kilometers.
Wow.
And so, you're in a situation where how do you stop that? So we approach the counter drone world by looking at it as a layered defense and not a zero sum game. And so all of the different technologies that folks use and folks have, we think are part of this. But when you look at the ability to stop an autonomous drone, the ability to stop a fiber optic control drone, the ability to stop your traditional drone, company like Epirus, which has a high powered microwave, is able to do that. And that's where, when we look at sort of what's the last line of defense and the ability to take out this kind of swarm we just discussed, where somebody's putting 50 drones towards a military base or an airport or some other high value installation.
And this is a quick reaction kind of thing usually? Like they don't have an hour to decide how to stop these things? They don't see them on radar or whatnot, or is it
No, you pick them up on radar, but it's not a lot of this stuff. It's not, it's a lack of time. Like, it's how do you react to that radar? Right. And so, everybody's got radar, but it's a question of how much time between, like, where are they being sent from? Because you're not necessarily going to have the time to react to them.
that's what I'm saying. It's a much quicker reaction need from a
Yes.
defense standpoint.
Yeah.
You can't fly a jet through them. It'll basically like a bird going through its engines.
So, I mean, the high powered microwave that like Epirus has, is designed to take out small quadcopter drones and defeat stuff that has outboard motors on boats. But really,
Hmm.
it's, projecting a force field out that as drones fly into that force field, they fall out of the sky because what the microwave does is essentially confuse the circuitry on the circuit board, and therefore the drone just doesn't work anymore.
Is it harmful to humans? How does it? It's like a electric, an EMP,
No,
or is it?
it's not harmful to humans. It's really just designed as a force field that kind of gets put out there at a certain range, and is able to stay there continuously,
Hmm,
so that as things run into that force field, they then fall out of the sky. So it's not a pulsing sort of
got
effect.
it. It's
It's more of
always
a
on.
continuous, always on. Yeah.
Just don't go through there with your cell phone.
Well, anything that's not hardened that has circuit boards, would be at risk. But, it's most larger vehicles, even larger drones, have a pretty hardened exterior. So it's
Hmm,
not like you
got
can
it.
sneak your way in there the way you could do with a small drone you bought at Best Buy.
Got it. That's cool. So what's next? So you mentioned that on that, I don't know if we call it offense, right? On the other side is okay, the enemy's going to have this force field technology as well eventually, maybe. So how do you defeat that? Is the autonomous drones?
Well, the autonomous drone is
Or
still
they still have the circuitry?
it's still, at risk with the high powered microwave. I mean, I think it's just a question of what you're firing at different things and whether you can overwhelm. I mean, it's the idea that we're going to have these, it's going to take decades before this kind of technology could be everywhere. I think that, it'll just be a question of what people are willing to do to attack a target. The high powered microwave is not going to stop a missile. So if somebody wants to fire a missile at something, then that's certainly
Yeah.
going to
Which is what
continue
you're
to
saying,
occur.
layered, right? We need this
Yeah,
to
that's
defeat
why
this to
that's
defeat
right.
that.
That's why you need multiple different types of defenses around major assets in order to protect them.
What's the next company you want to talk about? Shield?
Yeah, Shield AI is a company that we've known for 5.5 years. While at my old firm, we led their Series D fundraise. That was the summer of 2021. So we've known them for a long time, and they are the premier autonomy provider for the military for unmanned vehicles. They have their own feature drone called the VBAT, but they also have a software called HiveMind, which is their autonomy stack that they integrate onto that VBAT. But then they also license to other hardware providers, both domestically and internationally, so that those hardware providers can then build their own autonomy stack. And so, those are their two main businesses right now. But what they've been able to demonstrate, and they did this in Ukraine in towards the end of 2024, is the ability to operate in those environments I discussed where you have no radio frequency or GPS signals. And so
Hmm,
you need to have a software actually on board that can read and react and make decisions based on mission parameters and what they're trying to accomplish and still relay back appropriate information. And so very hard to do, but Shield has been able to do it. And Shield, if you've been following the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program, it's the future of the Air Force. CCA is what it's called. But basically, 2 weeks ago, the Air Force publicly announced that Shield AI was one of the vendors for that program. It is a massive opportunity because the Air Force has decided, and the Navy, that they no longer are focused on the Top Gun sort of mentality of fighting and dogfighting, but instead looking to put one fighter in a strike fighter with multiple drones on their wings. And then
hmm.
so they need to have folks make the drones and they need to have somebody behind the brains and connecting the drones to the pilot and using the autonomy to do it. And that's where Shield AI comes into play. And so what Shield AI is doing is providing what we think is the premier Group 3 drone to do intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, paired with the greatest autonomy out there. And so that's why they've become, a bigger and bigger player in the Defense Department. And then last October, they unveiled the XBAT, which is, their future product that they expect to be the first vertical takeoff, launch, and land sixth-generation strike fighter that would be unmanned at a fraction of the cost of a traditional F-18. And, it's a very ambitious effort. But if they get it right, could completely change warfare as we know it, because without the need for a runway or an aircraft carrier, you clearly change everything in terms of the way that we fight.
Lots to unpack there, right? That's truly Star Trek futuristic stuff, right? So the pilot can basically, hey, drones 1 and 2, peel off, take out that threat. Drones 4 and 5, reform on me, whatever they're kind of instructing them. The pilot's instructing them what to do in conjunction with his or her mission.
Yeah. And clearly it's a lot. So, having the software there to help that pilot is critical. And that's part of what Shield AI does in that program.
And like the compute, right? Like takes away that whole compute and energy conversation. I guess there's enough energy on board. Crazy stuff. All right, take us to the next one.
Yeah. So the next company we invested in is a company called Shift5. And what we realized and what the military knows, and even the commercial world is aware of, is the vulnerability of large platforms from cyber attack. And when we think of cyber attacks, we almost always think of an IT network or somebody phishing your social security number. But the reality is we have massive exposure, whether it's commercial airliners or rail or military fighter jets or even large drones, different large platforms that we operate that are very susceptible to bad actors hacking into them. And then the other major issue that has plagued the United States military is that oftentimes when something breaks, that's when it's fixed, and not until it breaks. So what Shift5 does is they have a hardware-software combination where they install a piece of hardware over the main serial bus of a vehicle, a large platform, and then they extract the data from that platform, and then are able to tell the end user or the maker of the vehicle, here's everything we can see that's going on. Here's an anomaly if somebody's trying to hack into this system. Here's some predictive maintenance kind of tips. Hey, this looks like this is not functioning properly. You should take a look and maybe fix it. It can detect if your GPS is being spoofed. So a lot of commercial airliners, they fly near these battle zones and suddenly their GPS is acting weird because of all the GPS spoofing that I mentioned earlier. So Shift5 is designed as a company that does operational technology cyber defense as opposed to information technology cyber defense. And so, we have seen in this year's budget, requirements over the next few years that every large platform in the military is going to need to be able to show that it can't be hacked into.
And so define a large platform. We're talking ship, truck,
fighter jets. Yeah, because a lot of people think like, we get into war and we send a bunch of fighter jets up and, they're fighting. And what happens if we lose all those fighter jets? And, so what happens if somebody launches a cyber attack and hacks into those fighter jets and they can't even get off the ground? And so what Shift5 does is protect and essentially those large platforms and give alerts to people as to what's happening there. And the commercial airline business is critical because that is another area where again we are woefully unprepared for that kind of attack. And I just hope.
Don't tell me that, but
yeah,
it's the
I
truth.
mean it's terrifying. And historically,
you mean even down to the controllers on the airplanes themselves, or down into the air traffic control systems and everything?
All of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all, and it's an area that, again, like many things we've seen over the history of this country, is that it isn't until there's a tragedy that we, sort of kick things into gear. But yes, these are vulnerable assets, and, we need to be able to defend against that. And so that's why Shift5 for us was an interesting opportunity because we feel they have the solution to meet this problem.
Yeah. And talk about, was there a debate in the military over the last, whatever, 5, 10 years of do they go to a walled off system versus a connected model, right? So it seems like Ship 5 is protecting against this is connected to the internet essentially. Or we're saying it's still walled off, but it could still be hacked.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I
don't know if
think
that was
just
clear, but yeah.
no, I think it's as more stuff moves to the cloud, and there's more and more stuff, and you just the way things are going, the more risk there is to stuff being out there, and the ability to find your way into these systems, whether it's air traffic control systems, whether it's the vehicle itself, and so it's all about how do you extract the data and detect what's happening on board those systems to give actionable intelligence so that the end user could make a decision, or maybe it gives them 30 seconds to adjust something
Yeah.
before it becomes catastrophic.
But I'm saying if I'm I'd say we need a disconnect, like a manual mode, but we're saying the tech is too advanced, doesn't exist. Like we can't unconnect from the network, so to speak, on some of these fighter jets and warships.
I mean, there's ways to connect and disconnect, but I think at this point it's sort of everything's so connected that it would be
Yeah.
hard to see that scenario.
Actually, a friend of mine's brother was a captain of a nuclear submarine, retired, and now works for, I didn't even know this was a thing, but AWS's military cloud, right? So I guess there's a military private AWS, Amazon Web Service cloud just for the military,
Amazon's a
which makes sense. But yeah, you went on just, we don't want to be using the public servers.
Yeah, AWS does a significant amount of business with the government.
One more, right?
Yeah, the
HawkEye?
final company we invested in last year was a company called HawkEye 360. What they do is they detect radio frequency emitters around the globe. They have 36 satellites on orbit that do this, and then they ingest all that data, and then they sell that data to the end customer, who are typically government agencies here and abroad. And then those government agencies can either take the raw data or the raw data plus an analytics package that HawkEye 360 provides to them as software as a service. And so they imagine that there's thousands and thousands and thousands of boats out there. They all have AIS. They're all supposed to identify where they are when they're doing
This is like this map in the Strait of Hormuz we keep seeing of the
that map,
ships
and then
active.
but imagine that that map's just capturing a very small fraction of everything that's out there.
Yeah.
So, you can have everything from fishing boats to wherever it is. And so, the when those AIS systems get turned off, the ability to, sort of track them and figure out where they're going, and the fact that they're likely doing something illicit, that's where HawkEye is very valuable. But they can detect radar, they can detect push-to-talk radios, they can detect GPS spoofing devices. So, they're able to ingest all this data and then provide that data to the end customer. And so it becomes a very effective way of monitoring what's going on out there in the world.
Crazy. And what are your thoughts? I'm thinking you're going to be biased because you're in this business, but like a company like that, why doesn't, or I'll rephrase the question, how did this all become private versus all government created technology? And do you see any issue there of like this company's licensing it out to other governments and whatnot?
No, so I mean, I think that the government has their own technology, continues to have their own technology. The intelligence agencies have their own dedicated satellites and dedicated assets. The issue is that first, a lot of them are at capacity. They don't have the ability to do all the different missions that need to be done. So they need to outsource some of these to commercial companies. The commercial companies oftentimes have better technology. They move quicker, cheaper. So, what the intelligence agencies and the finding is that, if we can outsource some of our, our needs to trusted partners, and they don't have many, which is why it's so important. If they do trust you, then, we can use those assets to augment everything. There's a lot of stuff happening all over the world every day, right? So there's only so
Yeah.
many assets that the government has. So now, they need to outsource to commercial companies.
And then there's rules and regulations about you can't license it to North Korea or something of that nature.
Yeah, and there's rules around, I mean, certainly not North Korea, but there's rules around any foreign military sale as far as what you can sell and how how it needs to be sold, and approval process, and a lot of different things that go into that.
And then are a lot of these founded by ex intelligence or military? They come out, see a need, and create the companies?
Yeah. No, there's definitely been, there's definitely a large portion of these companies who have, founders and leaders who spent time in the military or the intelligence apparatus, and so therefore understand, kind of the needs, but also how to coordinate and work with those agencies.
And then talk a little bit about your background. So you're playing hockey at West Point,
Playing
and
rock
then
West Point, and yeah, I spent 20 years on Wall Street in the public markets. I spent 6 years in the private markets and founded this firm, 18 months ago. So, bring a diverse set of experiences from a markets perspective, and we had a really great 2025, and we're excited about what's happening this year. And we'll see. I mean, every day it's a new adventure, but yeah, pretty
was
excited
your
about what you're doing.
private markets venture or PE? A
It was
little bit of
growth
both?
stage. I worked at a firm called Disruptive Technology Advisors at the time, now just Disruptive, but they were a pre-IPO investor, sector agnostic. And so I
Nice.
worked there for about 4.5 years before heading out on my own. And so, we have a similar business model. We just happen to focus on companies that are a little earlier in their life cycle, still growth stage, and with more of a specific focus on critical tech for national security.
And then how do you think about the venture piece that you need 100 bets for five to pay off huge? Do you think
Yeah,
of it in those kind of like lotto
yeah,
terms, or are you
we're the opposite.
okay?
We take 3 or 4 shots on goal a year, and we don't. We're not looking to kind of net out 5 winners against a bunch of losers,
Yeah.
significantly more losers. We're looking at it as each investment's its own vehicle. And, we want to minimize as much of the downside risk as possible for our investors. And that requires significant diligence to do that. But at the same time, give them the optionality for, a pretty good return over 3 years. We're not looking to hit home runs because we're not investing in the stage where those things typically happen.
And then what personally was this something you wanted from your background, like to, or you just saw the opportunity
Yeah, I mean,
of
I think some of it is, sort of as life goes, you find yourself back in worlds you didn't think you'd find yourself back in, and that was part of this. Clearly there's a mission here that matters, that helps motivate us and myself to support best companies to develop their business. And, it's an opportunity to help our investors, and it's a skill set that I've spent almost 3 decades now developing. And so, it's sort of a culmination of all that and a combination of all that that's sort of led to kind of where we are at this point in my life.
but if someone said, "Hey, we've got a good I don't know, autonomous cruise ship controls or something," you're like, "No, we're sticking more in the military space, the defense space," or you're willing and able to go different places like that.
No, we would stay in the defense space. I mean, the
Yeah.
companies we invest in can have commercial applications for sure, and we encourage that if it's possible, but we're defense first.
And then what do the exits look like for these companies? Like, are they going to get bought up by Raytheon, like the big boys, or are they going to go
Yeah,
public themselves?
when we make our investments, we typically, we underwrite, or we expect an IPO. That's our sort of exit strategy. There
Yeah.
are companies that may get bought. That's possible, but it's not something that we typically sort of think as or imagine an exit strategy, but it's possible. The reality is the Defense Department is not looking for more consolidation. That's what got us into the problems we're
Mm.
having right now with munitions and everything else. And the valuations of a lot of these defense tech companies are not cheap. And so the idea that companies like Lockheed or some of these other big the primes are going to suddenly come in and pay very high multiples for other businesses, not likely. So we think that for the sector, it's going to be mostly exits into the public market.
You ever worry the talent pool, like that the smart people are going into more commercial AI or trading crypto or going into hedge funds or things like this, and right of like how do you keep that talent pool of creating this new tech for these smaller companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always a risk. I think what's changed is, and why I don't, if you'd asked me that 4 years ago, I would have said, yeah, it's
Mm.
a problem. But I think, what we've seen is that, the Ukraine and other regions of the world have made it so that people are starting to understand that, putting deterrence in place to defend yourself is not the same as just some kind of crazy warmongering, sort of idea. And I think guys like Alex Karp at Palantir sort of have articulated it best. It's just a question of the mindset changing. And so we're seeing that, because people want to, the smartest folks out there, the smartest young engineers are really excited about joining defense tech companies. So, there'll always be competition in AI and different sectors, but we're finding a lot more people who may have historically never touched defense for whatever reason, who now want to be a part of the effort.
And then just you mentioned warmongering there. Do you ever run across investors who are like, I'm out, I don't want to be right? Seems like are there weird incentives of like we need wars, we need things to happen in order for this tech to prove itself? Does that ever come across investor conversations of like this feels weird?
No, I mean, I think that there's always healthy, moral and ethical discussions that take place. I mean, we don't, pretend to tell people sort of, that kind of stuff. We have a view, and our view is that, putting the proper deterrent in place changes the calculation of an aggressor. And so that's what we're trying to do. And the companies we support are doing that mission. And so hopefully by doing that, we actually avoid more war than actually contribute to it.
I've always thought eventually you'll have like maybe US versus China and we just go over the South Pacific somewhere and just have a drone battle, right? It'll be like virtual wars. We have all this stuff, no lives are lost, and each person can kind of prove their tech or not prove it, and then be like, okay, you won, China, you get this little island for now. We'll do it again in 5 years, and then the next guy wins, and they get this island. We'll see. That's my futuristic sci-fi
Well, we'll see.
solution. I want to follow it up. I want a fun, more fun or lighter, and a darker, like what keeps you up at night, or your Mount Rushmore of military movies. Would you want to go light or dark first?
Let's go dark first, and then that way
Okay.
we can end
Yeah.
on a light note.
Yeah. It's hard to go back to. So, yeah, just what keeps you up at night? Like now I'm going to be up at night. My wife's flying on a plane like right now in an hour. Um, Worried about the people hacking into the systems. But, and this, right at 20, 50 years ago, for a bad actor, they had to have huge funding, huge ability to build stuff, right? Like platforms to deliver intercontinental missiles. Like now you could get something small into a country, and you mentioned stadiums before. So yeah, I'm front running you, but yeah, what are some of the things nobody's talking about, at least outside of defense tech, nobody thinks about?
Yeah, I think that you kind of touched on it. I mean, from a geopolitical strategic perspective, losing Taiwan to China would be a significant problem for us and for citizens of this country that they
Mm.
probably don't.
You're saying just chip wise?
Yeah, I think the semiconductor industry people don't appreciate how behind we are from a actual sort of manufacturing perspective there. We're doing what we can to quickly change that, but it takes it takes years. And everything that we have that relies on, that kind of technology and high end processing, is it would get a risk. On a
Hmm.
tactical, smaller level, yeah, I think what you're saying is the fear that keeps me up at night, which is to say that, it's too easy for a bad actor to throw a bunch of drones or something at a civilian target, a military target as well, but really a civilian target that's unprotected and is able to cause maximum damage. And it could be anywhere. And so that keeps me up at night, because trying to think about how we protect against that stuff on the homeland is it's a challenge, and it's a race. And I fear that one of these days, and it could be sooner rather than later, there's going to be some attack, because it's not hard to do. And so it's just a question of somebody having the
Yeah.
will, and could cause maximum damage in a civilian atmosphere.
Right. What people have been talking about dirty bombs, and that's scary. But you're saying this would be much easier, much harder to
Much
detect.
easier. Yeah. I mean,
500 drones in country.
or you don't even need 500. All you need is, a handful of drones with the proper munition attached to them. And, you could do significant damage to you name it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's,
So do you see like some of these force fields or around football stadiums and all that eventually?
yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
certainly think that is a use case that needs to happen. And yeah, I think it'll happen around all major installations. And I think, there's going to be more and more need for different counter drone defenses around different targets that are, clearly big risk. And like I said, all you need is you're always going to have people willing and able to do bad things. And so now it's just a question of, have we gotten to a point where it's so easy to do this? And I would argue it is, that it's just a matter of time. And then are we going to wait for that time before we put the proper defense in place? And I hope we don't.
Mm. And the AI doesn't worry you that, right, this pilot's up there with his 6 autonomous wingmen. What do you call it? A wingman at that point, or
Yeah,
just wing things?
real wingmen. Yeah.
Um, that they turn on the pilot, shoot down the pilot, coordinate, and go do AI stuff like Skynet takes over.
I mean, I'm not worried about that. I think that
Yeah.
there's always been sort of that fear of the Terminator kind of situation, but
Yeah.
no, I'm not worried about that. I mean, we've been using autonomous or semi-autonomous weaponry for many years. To me, it would be much more concerned about, sort of commercial AI chatbot type situation, as far as being more of
Crashing the economy.
just a threat to then what's going on up in an air F.
That's good to hear. I like that. All right. Well, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too dark. It
Yeah.
was pretty good. So, but overall theory, there's something will come to the U.S. mainland, or to, right, to,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
100%. Yeah.
And then we didn't quite touch on, but protecting like power plants and bridges, all that kind of stuff, of just like that, anything that's connected, but that, right, that's out there too.
Anything
That's more
that
just pure cyber.
anything that's a high value target.
Yeah,
Could
that's
be
just
could
pure
be could
cyber
be a
though.
people, it could be a nuclear installation, it could be, whatever it is, and there's plenty of them out there. But just imagine, the what would happen, to the economy, just to the people, to the economy, to our way. I mean, look at what 9/11 did,
Yeah, it'd be
and
a
that
repeat.
changed everything. And so now, I just fear that there's another type of event that's sitting out there on the horizon, just waiting. And, the question is, what are we going to do to try to defend against that? And, we need to move quickly, and we need to put stuff in place that can help do that.
Do you go through the airport and just laugh of like, I'm taking my shoes off and going through this cheap metal detector? Like there's way bigger threats out there. You're like, come on, guys.
Y- You know,
I know too much.
well, you try not to think about it as much, but it's a, you know, there's threats everywhere, right? And so just try to think about the ones that we might be able to stop. And I see those kinds of attacks as things that we might be able to stop. It just requires, getting out in front
Yeah.
of it, which historically,
Yeah,
Has
we'll do it after the fact.
not been the case. You just don't do it.
All right, we'll finish with a little less dire circumstances. If this is too cliche, let me know. But being West Point in this industry, what's your kind of Mount Rushmore for top movies, military adjacent? I'll call them not necessarily war movies, military comedies. You could put Stripes in there if you want.
I mean, Stripes, I'm obviously, I think dating myself a little bit, but
Yeah,
fantastic movie, and one of John Candy's best performances.
yeah.
Um, I think if you're looking for a pure kind of quotable war movie, I think Full Metal Jacket is probably still the kind of tip of the spear. The first 20 minutes of that movie are probably some of the greatest 20 minutes of any movie ever.
Was that what your was that what it was like at West Point to some degree? A lot of yelling.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was probably it wasn't as inappropriate, or it was,
Yeah,
let's put it this way, it was less politically incorrect,
yeah, yeah.
than in that movie than at West Point. But there was it rhymed a little bit, the yelling and the screaming and everything else. So, but
They had your attention for sure.
yeah, but that was definitely one of the best war movies out there for sure.
All right. Wait, you got three more? You got a Mount Rushmore. You got to come up with four.
So I would say that based on guys I know and things, that the Hurt Locker
Mm-hmm.
painted a pretty good portrayal of not even what went on over there, but guys when they come back. And you see this kind of all over the place where guys come back and you kind of just don't know what to do with yourself, because like you've gone from like this insane
Yeah.
environment to like you're now buying milk in the grocery store. And so I think it certainly does that. I thought that, you know,
Best picture winner, I think, right? And win best
yeah,
picture.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I thought that's a really good one. I think that Zero Dark 30 was pretty good. Thought that was again, touched on a lot of themes and a lot of debates, and as far as, Guantanamo or places like that. And so thought it was an interesting story. Um, and then,
I was reading recently they built that whole compound to practice, but it was like a fake wall. They didn't have time to build like a huge stone wall. And so when the Black Hawk actually came in, the draft off the wall caused that one to crash because in the training the wall wasn't as solid, so they didn't get that draft off the wall.
that's
Like,
interesting.
yeah, crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I gotta date myself a little bit here, but the original Red Dawn,
Yes,
a
that's on my list. Yeah.
terrific Patrick Swayze movie, who in my opinion is the most underrated actor of all time, and had an
What?
incredible
Yeah.
slugging percentage if you look at the movies he was in and which ones of them were fantastic. So, it's
And I like you said the original because the follow-up one was terrible. Like
yeah,
they
yeah.
came up with that
No,
new
it's
one
kind
10
well,
years ago.
it's
Yeah.
just like Roadhouse. Like I won't watch the new
Yeah, yeah.
Roadhouse out of respect for Swayze, but if you look at Red Dawn, was sort of peak US Russia, stuff. And obviously there were fantastic movies then. First Blood, movies that, you really could, get behind, sort of the anti-hero. But yeah, I thought Red Dawn was great.
And yeah,
Reality is
we're probably close in age. That was right. You were like, that would be me and my high school football team. We would have fought like that. Yeah.
100%. You go
Yeah.
up into the woods, and you do what you had to do to survive.
Love it. That was on my list. I had a few other ones. Taps.
Yep.
I had to throw Top Gun in there, but now you're saying there's not going to be any more Top Gun.
Well,
No more pilots,
it's
yeah.
a dated thing. It's still there's still guys out there doing it. It's just not what it used to be. And yeah, Taps, good movie. George C. Scott, who obviously, Patton was unbelievable, but he was he was really good in Taps as well.
Three Kings with George Clooney and Ice-T, I think. You
Yep.
ever see that? They like steal the gold in the in Iraq.
Saw it.
And then it came out same year as Top Gun, Iron Eagle.
Yeah,
Did you ever watch that one?
with Lou Gossett
Right? The
Jr.
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, the kid's dad's shot down in some African country and he steals a
Yeah.
F-16 and goes
Yeah.
and saves him.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there was a good soundtrack to that, if I remember correctly,
For
too.
sure. Yeah, he plays his heavy metal as he's flying.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll leave it there. Ian, thanks so much. Keep up the good work protecting us, and we'll talk soon.
All right, Jeff. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, that's it for the pod. Thanks to Ian. Thanks to RCM for sponsoring. Go to rcmalts.com. Check out that blog post on the AI. I am beat after sleeping in the airport, like I said, so I think we'll take off next week, and we'll be back the week after that with someone good. Peace.
You've been listening to The Derivative. Links from this episode will be in the episode description of this channel. Follow us on Twitter at RCMAlts and visit our website to read our blog or subscribe to our newsletter at rcmalts.com. If you liked our show, introduce a friend and show them how to subscribe. And be sure to leave comments. We'd love to hear from you. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinions and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of RCM Alternatives, their affiliates, or companies featured. Due to industry regulations, participants on this podcast are instructed not to make specific trade recommendations nor reference past or potential profits, and listeners are reminded that managed futures, commodity trading, and other alternative investments are complex and carry a risk of substantial losses. As such, they are not suitable for all investors.